Well, hello there and welcome back to my channel. If you are new here, my name is Casey and I'm the designer behind the indie sewing pattern company Pattern Scout. And today I just kind of wanted to walk you guys through my process for grading a pattern. So if you watched my video last week, I showed you a little bit of my process for developing a pattern, kind of getting the basic shape of the pattern and making sure that I like the fit and the style. And I got to a really great place with this blouse pattern that I'm working on and hoping to release for the spring. And so this week I am working on grading. So I'm just going to be showing you mostly a screen recording of my computer. I edit and draft and grade all of my patterns using Adobe Illustrator. I also use Adobe InDesign to create my instruction booklets and that thing. So I use the Adobe suite pretty frequently. And there are other programs that you can use to create and edit sewing patterns. I'm not familiar with those products and I have actually tried a couple of them and it just felt like such a huge learning curve and it was so frustrating when I had this digital software at my fingertips that I already felt really comfortable with and it's already actually really easy for me to use. So yeah, I really enjoy using Adobe Illustrator for drafting and grading the patterns. I also have a Skillshare class on how to draft a bodice sloper and a sleeve sloper using Adobe Illustrator. So I'll just put a link in the description to that class if you're interested. Okay, let's get started. So whenever I am developing a pattern, I start with just a basic draft. So I have my bodice sloper that I created actually quite a bit ago. And this is the same sloper that I used for the class that I did on Skillshare. So if we zoom in here, we can see I've just got a basic front bodice, a back bodice, and a sleeve. To create this particular pattern, I used my Pattern Making for Fashion Design book. I'll show you that here. So I always use this book to start out when I'm creating a draft, and usually in my experience, like the first draft that I create using the instructions in this book, it's never perfect, and I usually have to do quite a bit of adjusting to make it feel and fit right. So, but this is a really good starting point for kind of the basics of pattern drafting and taking a flat pattern, a bodice sloper, and using that to develop new patterns. So I do that for every pattern. I usually start with just this exact process. I have kind of a template file that I use for the slopers, and I just open that up, save it as a new document, and start designing. And so you can see here where I took the front and back bodice sloper and started making the adjustments to create the raglan sleeve style that I'm going to be using for this blouse. So I've got my sleeve, I've got the back bodice, and actually for this pattern I'm going to have two front bodice pattern pieces. Front bodice B cup and C cup, and then I have the front bodice D cup and E cup, which includes that dart. Another thing I'll note too, whenever I'm in the drafting phase in this drafting document, I am drafting everything without seam allowance. So I'm just doing all of the basic drafting, getting the kind of pattern pieces the way that I want them. And all I did was just copy kind of these final bodice pieces that I made in the draft. I just copied and pasted those into my grade file. So I'm gonna be using this book, Professional Pattern Grading, and this is by Jack Handford. And this is the book that I've been using for the last couple of years to grade my patterns, and I really like it. It's very straightforward. I've mentioned this in another video. I'll also put a link to this book and to the Pattern Making for Fashion Design book down in the description below if you want to check those out. So I'm going to be using the raglan blouse grading instructions to grade this pattern, so I'll have this book handy. And in this book, they recommend that you basically split the pattern into sections and then you move those patterns based on the guidelines in this book. So we'll say literally like move this up 1/8 inch and over 1/8 inch, and then you'll move that section that amount. So I've basically divided up the pattern based on the instructions in this book, and I'm gonna be grading the BC cup and the DE cup at the same time. So right now, if I go into my layers panel, I only have the size 12, which is my size. I'm a size 12 on my size chart. So I always start with that size and grade up and down from there. I want to go ahead and divide these patterns at all of these points to basically put the pattern into the sections, because I want to do that before I start doing all the grading so that I won't have to do that for every single layer, if that makes sense. Oh, and also I have put these dividing lines there on a layer that I just called grade guides, and I want to make sure that I lock that layer because I don't actually want to move those. I just want to use them as a guide for dividing up the pattern. And I'm just going to go through and divide this at all of these points where these lines overlap. To do this, I press C for cut, or you can just click on this little scissors icon here. And I'm just going to go around and cut this pattern at all of these points. And that is just going to separate these lines. You can see now I've got, this is kind of isolated by itself now. I'm going to continue going around and doing that at all of these lines. Oh, and another thing I will mention too is that I have these pattern pieces grouped. So I've got the pattern outline, the notch, and the dart all grouped together so that when I move these, like if I press the V and the general, what is this arrow called? It's just the selection tool. So if I select the selection tool, it's gonna select that whole group of items. And if I do the type A, that's gonna bring up the direct selection tool. Yeah. And that is going to allow me to select individual pieces within that group and move those individually, but they'll still remain grouped. So I'll do the same thing for this piece too. I'll just go through and cut at all of these points. Oops. And I wanna make sure that I get right on that line. There we go. And zoom out. And when I zoom, I'm just hitting Command and negative. So I'm gonna get back to V, and then if you hit the space bar and you click and drag, you can pan, basically. It gives you this little hand. All right, so, okay. So I've got all of those pieces separated. But again, they're still grouped. So they're still in a group, but if I select them with the white arrow, it'll let me select each of those individual pieces. And if I select it with the black arrow, it selects the entire group. Okay, so I've got that prepped. So now I just want to copy these onto each of the layers. So I'm gonna create new layers. I'll start with, I'll just create several here. So I've got 12, this one will be 14, this one will be 16, this one will be 18, and so on until, oops, until I get to size 30. And then I'm also gonna add several layers below 12. So now that I have all of the layers created, I want to actually go in now and ungroup this pattern. So I want to ungroup both of these. I'll click both of these and right click and just say ungroup. And you may have to do this a couple of times depending on how much grouping you did. So it looks like I only grouped it once, so that's good. Oh, this one I need to do again, so I'll ungroup. So now I can directly select those pieces. And the reason that I'm doing this is because when I go through here, I'm gonna wanna be able to select like all of the bottom pieces or all of the top pieces like this. And if I use my direct selection tool, the little white arrow, it's only gonna select the parts of the lines that I actually cover. So like these two lines down, or these two spots down here at the bottom wouldn't have been selected. So black arrow lets me select items as a whole, and that little white arrow only selects parts of items. So that's why I'm ungrouping this. So now that I've done that, I actually want to copy and paste these pattern pieces onto every single layer in exactly the same position. So I'm gonna go like this, select the whole thing, Control C, and then I'm just going to paste it with Control Shift V onto layer 0, layer 2, layer 4, and so on. And that Control Shift V paste it in exactly the same place. So I'll do that for all of these layers, except for layer 12 because it already has the pattern on there. And you can see once you've pasted an item onto a layer, a little black or a little white arrow shows up next to the color of that layer, and that just lets you know that there are actually items on that layer now. And all of the layers are different colors, which is nice. And you can set these colors too, which I'll show you. So I've got all of these pasted onto every layer. If you double click on the layer, then a little option box comes up and you can change the color of that layer. Okay, so now that I've got all of those pasted in, I'm gonna start grading the layers above size 12. So I wanna make sure that I lock all of these size 12 through size 0, because I don't wanna move those yet, because the grade rules for the decrease in size are obviously gonna be opposite than the rules for the increase in size. So I'm basically gonna be grading each layer at the same time and just kind of getting progressively bigger as I go through each size. So to start, I've got my book here with my grade rules. I don't want to show you too much of this book, just I don't want to get into any kind of copyright infringement. But yeah, this book is great. It has kind of a chart that shows you the amount that you need to move each piece at each corner. And then it has a little diagram here for how to separate the pattern and the direction to move each part of the pattern. One other thing too that's very helpful is you want to make sure that you have your size of the increment that you're going to be moving when you use your arrow keys, because I'm going to be using the arrow keys for all of these movements. So if I go up to Illustrator here in the top menu, I don't know if you can see this, it might be cut off on my screen here, but I'm basically clicking Illustrator at the menu, and I'm going to Preferences, General. So keyboard increments under General, under the General tab, 0.0625 is 1/16 of an inch. So I've got that set here, and I want to click OK, because all of these measurements are going to be moving in either 1/16 of an inch or 1/8 inch increments. If I just hit the arrow key one time, that's a 1/16 of an inch that I've moved on the screen. 2 times is 1/8 of an inch, and so on. So that way I'm not having to type it in each time. I can just like use my arrows to kind of quickly navigate through the grading. So let's start with size 14. So I'm gonna select all of the top. I'm not selecting the bottom. I'm just selecting all of these top pieces above this line here. And this book has different instructions for the different amounts of grade. So they have one for a 1-inch grade, a 1.5 inch grade, and a 2-inch grade. So for 12 through 14, I have a 2-inch grade. So for the first move, I'm gonna just move this up 1/8 inch. So I've got all that selected, and I'll hit my arrow key twice, 1, 2, and that's 1/8 of an inch. The next move is gonna be up and out 1/8 of an inch. But when I do this, I wanna make sure that I deselect this corner here, okay? So it's gonna be 1, 2, 1, 2 for 1/8 of an inch. The next move will move down 1/8 of an inch. So now I'll deselect this and this. So I'm gonna deselect those two, and I'm gonna move down 1/8 of an inch. So again, 1, 2. Okay, and you can see that just barely moved here. So I'm gonna continue doing that, working my way around using this chart for the 2-inch grade, and also looking at the diagram here to see kind of how much I need to move each piece. And as I move each corner, which is numbered here on this diagram, I'm gonna deselect that and work my way all the way around. So I'll do that now. I've got kind of a basic outline here. Right now you can see that things are kind of broken up where I separated the pieces. I will go back in and redraft the kind of basic outline for each of these. And you can also see that it moved the dart here. I will have to kind of reposition the dart points once I get to that point too. But yeah, you can see we have just graded our first size now. I am being a little bit careful about how much of this grading book information I share with you, just because I don't wanna get into copyright infringement. I think I've said that like 2 or 3 times already. But yeah, so I'm just kind of showing you the basics, but if you get this book is not that expensive. I've got it linked down in the description. If you get this book, it'll show you, it like literally says move it this much, and it makes it so much easier. So I'm gonna continue doing this with each of the sizes. So now I've basically graded sizes 14 through 30 by 2 inches. Like I've added 2 inches of ease at the waist basically, and at the bust. So now that I've done that, I'm gonna lock size 14, because now size 14 is graded, and I'm gonna take the same process to grade the other sizes. So every time I do this, I'm grading all of the sizes at once, and then I'm locking, like size 16 I'll lock next time. So I'm gonna do that now. Okay, so now I have the upper sizes graded, and these are all a 2-inch grade. And a couple of things that I notice, and this usually happens whenever I'm grading a pattern, like sometimes the way that things kind of fall, it doesn't look totally natural. And so I usually do go in and edit things kind of on the fly. I've noticed that this book typically wants you to kind of grade the length a little bit more than I like to do. So right now there's a 1/8 inch difference between each of the lengths of each size. I usually end up going back in and decreasing that to about 1/16 of an inch, because let's see, I mean, if we just measure that, like the size 12 is basically about, I don't know, about 1.25 inches difference from the size 30 as far as the front bodice length. And that might be fine, but I'm gonna kind of play around with that a little bit, especially for like the smaller sizes, because I don't want that much of a difference in the length for the smaller sizes, you know? And that's just from my own experience of working with these patterns over the last couple of years. So yeah, this is just a starting point, and then I kind of work off of a little bit of intuition and trial and error, and then I also learn a lot through testing as well. So now I'm gonna do the same process to grade out the lower sizes. I'm gonna make sure that I lock all of the sizes above size 12, including size 12. And then I'm just gonna grade out the lower sizes using the grade rules to decrease the grade. Now, one thing that I wanna keep in mind here is that my grade between, let's see, from 12 to 10 and size 10 to 8, it's a 1.5 inch grade. So it's different than my larger sizes. And then from size 8 down to size 0, the grades are only an inch. So I wanna make sure that I keep that in mind. So I only will grade, 10 and 8 with a 1.5 inch grade. Then I wanna make sure that I kind of shift my focus to grading for 1 inch for the lower sizes. So I'm gonna do that now. Okay, so I have finished the very basic draft grade of all of the sizes for the front bodice, both the B, C cup and the DE cup. I'll kind of point out a few things here where I might have kind of messed up a little bit on the grading. So like at this armpit here on the lower sizes and this one here on the DE cup, you can tell there's something a little different happening here. And so when I start cleaning up the draft, I can go in and fix that, but you'll notice sort of a pattern starts to develop, and you can kind of spot areas where maybe there's a little bit of something funky happening or a discrepancy that you need to correct. And the same goes for down here, like right here at this bottom corner, the bottom front center corner. It's kind of a mess right here, but that's a really easy thing to clean up because I'll just basically extend the center front here and connect it to these. So some of these things can be fixed when I start cleaning up the pattern, but you can kind of see the basic outline of the pattern pieces here as they're graded. This area here with these mid-section parts of the sleeve seam where it attaches to the shoulder, I think I need to adjust the grade there because generally, I want this to be able to kind of smoothly grade here, and I'll show you a little bit more how I do that in a minute. So now that I have the basic grading done, I need to go through and just kind of refine the outlines of the pattern pieces, make a few adjustments to certain areas. For example, the dart points. Usually the grading for these, I feel, is a little bit too much for the actual dart point. So I'll go back in and adjust those. While the side seam is increasing, the kind of center bust point is not increasing at the same rate. So to do that, again, I'm gonna be grouping this into two groups, the larger sizes and the smaller sizes. 12 will stay the same, I'll keep that locked. So let's start with the sizes above 12. So I'll lock everything 12 and below, unlock everything above 12, and then I'm also going to hide all of the layers below 12. So I'll just turn the little eyes off on those, just so that it's easier for me to get those dart points. And then for this adjustment, I'm actually going to use the direct selection tool, so the white arrow, so that I can just select those points. And I'm going to do a group selection there and just zoom in. So I'm using Command and plus, and I'm just gonna shift these over. I'm gonna start with a 1/16 of an inch to start. So I've done the first shift, and then I'll lock size 14, so that that's no longer moving. Do it again, and I'll just keep doing this, shifting and locking all the way up to size 30. And then I'll do the same thing for the sizes below 12. So I'm gonna turn all of those on. I may go back in and shift those again. I feel like the amount that I've shifted those in the past has been a little bit different. So I'm just gonna kind of compare it to other patterns that I've done where I've had to adjust the dart points, but you get the idea. Okay, so if I go back over to my grading here, I'll show you briefly how I draft a new outline for the pattern piece. So let's go, I'm gonna turn off sizes 30 through 16 and then sizes 10 through 0. So now we just have size 12 and size 14. And I'm gonna work on the size 14 layer. The easiest way that I have found to do this is actually, I'm gonna go back over to my draft and I'm just going to grab the original size 12, copy that, and I'm gonna paste it on top of the size 12 here and just line that up. Put this one over here. I'm gonna copy those again. So I'm gonna grab both of those and I'm gonna, and because those, I just pasted those on, they automatically paste on top. So I know that I'm selecting the layer that has not been broken, before I did the grading. So I'm gonna select that size 12 that I just copied and pasted. I'm gonna copy that again. and then I'm gonna lock 12, select layer 14, and I'm gonna Control-Shift-V to paste that in exactly the same place. And now I'm going to adjust this outline to fit the new size 14. So I'll just go around and make sure that all those anchor points match up here. That looks pretty good so far. And it gets a lot more complicated as you go up in the sizes, because as you're kind of stretching this thing to fit, you do have to make a few more adjustments to make it look right. But you can see once I pull that over there, it looks a lot better. And then I also want to make sure that I move my little notch and align the dart here with the size 14. So when it comes to the notches, again, this is one of those things, as you're kind of working through this, you may have to make adjustments to that to make it a little bit more uniform across all of the sizes as far as the grade of that. But for now, I'm gonna leave it where it is. So I'll come back to that in a little bit. But here you can see this line here is a little bit lower than I think I want it, but that may be something that I have to adjust later. But I'll continue doing this for all of the sizes, creating that new outline so that it's no longer a broken outline. Okay, so now I have drafted all of the new outlines for each of the pattern pieces, and right now I'm just looking at this DE cup draft for the front bodice. I did that one first, and it still looks a little bit funky, so what I'm gonna do now is make sure that I unlock all the layers now. I'm going, except for the guide layer, and I'm actually gonna turn that off. I don't think I need that anymore. Okay, I'm gonna do a group selection of all of these, and I'm just going to hit Option and click and drag to create a copy. I'm just gonna kind of pull this over out of the way. And I wanna go through and just delete all of the broken lines so that all I'm left with are my new drafted lines for each size layer. So I'm gonna do that now, keeping that other one so that I don't lose anything that I've already worked on, just because I'm a little paranoid about that. Oh, also wanna make sure I save. This is something I always forget to instruct, but you wanna make sure you're saving regularly. Okay, so now that I've gotten all of those kind of broken up lines cleaned out of the pattern pieces, you can see that I have kind of the basic outline here, but there are still a few things that look a little bit kind of wonky. So I'll go in and just manually correct some of these areas. Like here at the neckline, I need to kind of decrease the amount of curvature here and then increase it for the larger sizes. And then the same goes for the underarm curve here. So I probably need to reduce it just a little bit on the smaller sizes and then increase that curve here on the larger sizes just to make this a little more uniform. And then I'm also gonna go through and reduce the grade at the bottom hem because I really don't think that it needs to be an 1/8 inch there. I think that it could be a 1/16 of an inch and be fine for each of the size grades for that area. I mentioned before, eventually I'm gonna go through and update the dart points to make a little bit more sense because I'm not totally sold on the location of those right now, but I'll go through and kind of address that a little bit later. But in general, this whole process of grading, the way that I approach it is a little bit of math, a little bit of strategy, and a little bit of intuition. There's just some things that I've learned over time from doing this that I know that I need to adjust, and then I can kind of follow my gut on that and make sure that the pattern pieces don't have any weird corners where there's supposed to be a curve, like here in this kind of shoulder seam, arm side area where it attaches to the sleeve. So I'll go through now and just kind of update those things, just kind of eyeball it, so to speak, and then this pattern draft will be mostly finished for this pattern piece. Okay, so that is basically how I grade a pattern piece. You can see here now it looks much cleaner. Once I get all of the pieces graded, I'll show you here kind of an example of a pattern that I have done in the past. So this is the Ava dress. This is a pattern that I have already released. And you can see here that I've done all the grading. In here I've got different cup sizes. So I've got a B cup, a C cup, and a D cup for this pattern. I've got a back bodice, I had a skirt, I've got facings, and I've also kind of worked through some options. Actually, this is an option I was thinking of doing for a wrap skirt that I ended up not doing. And then once I have all of these graded, I will bring them into the main pattern file and start laying everything out and adding annotations like the pattern numbers and names, like how many of each one to cut, whether you cut it on the fold or whether you cut it mirrored. I'll start adding all of the labels and that sort of thing. So that's kind of how I start moving forward with the actual pattern layout on the sheets that you print when you get the pattern. So anyway, that is the basic technique for how I grade my patterns. And I just wanted to give you guys a little peek into that process. I know when I first started doing the pattern design, I was really intimidated by the grading and kind of found it a little bit overwhelming because I wasn't exactly sure what I was doing. So I did hire a grader when I first started designing patterns, and it was actually quite affordable. I can't remember exactly how much it was, but I think to grade out like 15 or 16 sizes, it was less than $200 to hire someone to do that grading for me. Because it's really not that hard of a process once you get the hang of it. But yeah, that was definitely money well spent. And I also learned a lot about grading through that process, just seeing how the grader did that for me. I hope that you found this helpful if this is something that you're interested in trying out or if you're interested in designing your own patterns. I'd put links in the description below to the books that I use, both the pattern making book, Pattern Making for Fashion Design, and the grading book that I use. And highly recommend both of those. They make it a lot easier to approach these types of projects. And anyway, if you've made it this far, thank you so much for watching, and I will see you in the next video. Bye.